9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainstorm. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 25. Battle for Freedom. The Stitchpunk clan didn't meet the Spider Beast head-on. Instead, 9 directed them to run into the destroyed forest nearby. He knew it would slow down the machines enough where they could put a few good lengths between them. He pointed them to the right direction. Waving them forward, the Spider Beast army pursued them, shrieking and skittering forward. The machine screamed and began to follow them as well, pulling its huge body after its prey. 9 followed his coven into the dead forest. There were miles and miles of blackened tree trunks, their branches thickly coated with ash. Tall rock formations surrounded them as they ran deeper and deeper into the forest. The machines were quickly catching up to the Stitchpunks, determined to kill them all. The fabrication machine had abandoned its mission to immediately take their souls. Before doing so, it was going to tear them apart. It was going to crush their bodies, rip them into pieces, and just before they would perish, only then would it take their souls. With the spy machine's power source pulsing throughout its body, it seemed unbeatable. However, taking their souls would make it immortal, an invincible being that would finally have finished its mission. It would need to get the rest of the talisman back. Rain soaked the 9 ragdolls as they ran through the forest. 9 looked over his shoulder to see the Spider Beast quickly catching up to them. He racked his mind for some sort of plan. He looked around desperately, trying to find an escape. 9's eyes fell upon the ledge of rock surrounding himself and his friends, sloping sharply upwards into the large cliff. The rain made its surfaces extremely slick and slippery, skidding to a halt in the dirt. 9 called out to the others. "Get on the rocks! Hurry!" 9 directed, leaping onto a nearby ledge. The Stitchpunks immediately obeyed without question. Each helped the other as they climbed up the slick rocks, 8 practically dragging 1 and 2 up the cliffs. The 2 old men having a difficult time climbing up the steep slope. 5 and 6 helped the twins when the ledge was too tall for them to climb over. Trailing behind them, 9 struggled to climb the slippery slope. He could hardly move without sending needle-sharp streaks of agonizing pain through his body. However, he ignored the pain the best he could. He concentrated on grabbing one ledge then another. He was nearly to the edge. Glancing over his shoulder, 9 saw that his plan was working. The spider beasts with their tiny, spindly legs kept slipping on the rain-slicked rocks. The fabrication machine was hindered by the trees blocking its path. It had to rip each one out of the ground and toss it away. Suddenly, a ledge underneath 9's hand crumbled. The solid earth holding it to the cliff dissolved in the rain. 9 tumbled down the cliff, sliding easily down the smooth, slick rocks. Crying out in panic, he desperately clawed at the rocks to stop himself from slipping. His fingers scraped against the slippery face, unable to find something to hold on to, and as he fell, he was heading straight for the swarming spider beast's clutches. Suddenly, there was a familiar figure right beside him, wrapping her arm around his middle, and stopped his fall. 7 dug her spear into the side of the cliff, halting them right above the claws of the spider beasts. The 2 scrambled up the cliff. 7 pushed 9 up the rocks whenever he slowed. Finally, the 2 were climbing up over the ledge and were on even ground. They ran across the flat, somewhat rutted surface of the outcropping. 9 didn't dare glance over his shoulder. He could hear the spider beast crawling over the edge of the cliff. 7 then led him towards a huge rut cut into the earth, where the rocks ended and the earth began. As they approached, 7 helped 9 into the rut, which turned out to be a soldier's trench used during the war. Guns and shells were littered everywhere, with shreds of torn clothing and shards of metal everywhere. As they ran through the trench, Nine's heart quickened as his injured sides sheared with the dreadful pain. He forced himself not to slow and keep running until they were climbing up the other side of the trench. 9 and 7 reunited with the others as they entered a clearing where the rocky outcrops ended and the entrance to the barrens began. It was a flat plain of dirt that seemed strangely infinite, circling with dead, fallen trees. For just a few moments, Nine was able to bend over, desperately trying to catch his breath. Rain ran off his optics as he turned to see an army of spider beasts, and finally the awesome, immense mass that was the fabrication machine. They climbed towards them, shrieking violently. The machine's arms were spread wide as it stared down the 9 little rag dolls. For a moment in time, the two groups stared at one another, preparing for battle. That was mere moments from commencing. Claps of thunder rumbled across the sky, while lightning danced along the clouds and illuminated the night. 9 stared at his greatest enemy, his heart pounding. He would never be able to name it, but something halted his pain, dulled it as an intense inferno blazed from within his soul. A burning rage flared through him like a powerful fire, fury sweeping through him like crashing waves. He was going to end it, and end it now. A flash of lightning seemed to signify the beginning of the battle. The fabrication machine emitted an unearthly screech and sent its spider beast scuttling forward towards the Stitchpunks. "No!" one cried out, his voice echoing through the barrens. His regal crimson cape bellowed around him as he raised his staff towards the machines, the bell tinkling loudly. 7 was the first to rush forward, her skull pulled over her face and her spear clutched tightly in her fists. 8 was right behind her, his helmet over his face, and his sword glinting with the rain that dropped off it. 9 was beside him, his pen blade clutched tightly in his fists. He hardly noticed the pain now, as the battle overcame his mind. Behind him, the others surged forward. A newfound courage overcame them. Even the twins and 6 ran directly towards the monsters they'd been running from their entire lives. The battle passed up in the blur to 9. He ran towards the spider beast, which reared up above him. Without thinking, 9 drove his blade right through its chest. The beast let out a gurgly cry before short-circuiting and collapsing toward the rocks. Dead, sparks issued from the body were immediately extinguished by the rain. 9 looked over the dead beast before turning and taking another beast head-on. Everything 7 had taught him guided his movements. The way he dodged the numerous claws trying to drive their way through his body, flicking his wrist and moving his shoulders in just the right way to sever the head of the second beast. He could barely register the pain in his body or realizing just how weak he was. He was focusing on fighting them off and winning the war. 9 suddenly looked up to see another beast rearing up behind him, ready to drive its claws to its back. Suddenly, before it had a chance to do anything of the sort, the tip of a familiar corkscrew cane was thrusted through its chest from behind. The beast collapsed, twitching, revealing a very proud-looking 2, his old knees shaking and his frame trembling, dripping with rain. 9 grinned in disbelief, while the other Stitchpunk gave a friend a crafty wink. The battle around them was commencing in a similar way. 8 was chopping off legs, swinging wildly and cutting everything off that he could find. 7 was battling with a bit more finesse, gracefully dodging her way through the beasts and severing heads one by one. 5 showed his expertise with the crossbow, arrows flying this way and that. Each hit a precise and deadly one. Even Six and the twins had joined their fellows in the battle. The two younger boys used their flashlight eyes to stun and distract the monster before jumping on it and holding it down. It screeched and struggled violently, trying to escape. Before it could do so, however, Six swiftly used his sharp fingers to sever cables and disconnect gears. His hands darted his way this way and that, and he pulled out its mechanics, completely destroying it from the inside out. Soon the beast was lying limply, twitching, as if dead, as it died. One was hooking the beast with his crook of a staff, then snapping the cables that connected their necks to their heads with one swift flick. Each time he did so, the bell on his staff twinkled merrily, as if a Sixth song of triumph. There was a light gleaming from his sinister eyes as rain dripped off his crown, and his cape bellowed in screaming winds. The beast's numbers were dwindling rapidly. All the while, the machine could only watch from a distance, eerily waiting. One of the last beasts was coming up on Nine. He turned, raised his blade suddenly. He grinned and swiped down low, severing off the tips of the beast's 8 spindly legs. The spider beast stumbled and landed heavily on the rocks. Seven leapt up from behind it and hooked the blade of her spear underneath its head. With one swift yank, the beast's head came tumbling off in a shower of sparks and severed cables. 9 and 7 shared a wide smile at their teamwork. Suddenly, 7 was knocked down from behind with a grunt by another beast, climbing over her, heading right for 9. He wasn't fast enough before the beast had gathered him in its arms and tossed him to the rocks. 9 landed to his injured side and cried out in pain. Before he could get up or do anything, the spider beast was on top of him, its jaws trying to chomp down upon him. 9 struggled to keep the beast off of him, kicking and pushing its sharp fangs away. His strength was disappearing rapidly. He knew he couldn't keep holding the beast away for much longer before he was torn to ribbons. All of a sudden, the beast was knocked away from him onto its back. One stood over the weak boy, holding his staff out in front of him. He had just saved 9 from being killed. The spider beast flailed on its back before it managed to flip itself back over and shriek, heading right for 7. She was helping the twins head for the twisted rocky outcroppings of the escape the fabrication machine, and was unaware. One ran straight for the spider beast, calling out a warning to 7 before hooking his staff around the beast's neck. He yanked backwards, immediately snapping the monster's neck. The last spider beast fell to the ground, dead. 7 whirled around and stared at one in disbelief. The two looked at one another for a moment, knowing that the elder had just done for the girl he hated for so long. The two then looked up to see the fabrication machine shrieking, crawling around the rocks right for them. 9 was directly in its path, laying in a small puddle. He hadn't been able to get back to his feet since the beast knocked him to the ground. His entire body shook, struggling to find whatever strength he had left within him. 7 and 1 immediately rushed for him as the fabrication machine loomed closer and closer. 9 struggled to get his feet underneath him, but his knees kept buckling, and he kept collapsing back into the water. His strength was nearly spent, and the fabrication machine was still alive. He needed to get up. He couldn't give in now. One was suddenly by his side, grasping his arm and trying to heave the weak 9 to his feet. "Come on, boy. You must get up. It's coming!" one demanded. With 7's help, the two managed to lift 9 to his feet. The young man looked up in horror to see the gigantic monster looming over them, its red eye glistening in the rain dripping from its body. 7 helped 9 to run across the rocks to the earth as the fabrication machine crawled after them, shrieking. The 3 suddenly screeched to a halt as they found their path into the twisted rocks, and the forest was blocked off by a fence of barbed wire. The fabrication machine shrieked, thinking it had him cornered. "Come on! We gotta get through this," 7 said loudly, and the 9 tried to struggle their way through the old and tangled wires. The machine tried to follow them as they descended the hill, trying their best not to rip their fabric skin or on the barbed wires. One's cape got tangled to the barbs at one point, and no matter how he struggled, he was caught. 2 grabbed his fellow elder's hand and helped him out of the tangle of wires, trying to pull him forward. 8 was leading them all, lifting the wires for them to crawl under and slashing the wires with his thin sword, making them rip around and into the faces of the Stitchpunks. They could hear the fabrication machine struggling behind them, snarling menacingly, but they dared not turn back, trying to not allow the barbs to pass or cut him into the injured side. Struggling harder than the others to get through the fields of wires was 9. He was already exhausted, thinking of the mission he still needed to finish. This, nonetheless, drove him on further. He grabbed wires, trying to pull himself forward, his knees shaking hard and threatening to give out underneath him. However, the distance between him and the others was lengthening. His struggles were becoming futile as he became more and more tangled in the wires. "Ah!" he cried as one of the barbs caught on the red stitching of his scar. He stopped thrashing against the wires in a feeble attempt to free himself, knowing that his shoulder would split open if he struggled even further. Drenched by the rain, he hung there limply, only the tips of his feet brushing the ground. Wires wrapped themselves around his arm and torso, and barbs scraped his burlap skin. There was no way he could move without injuring himself. He panted hard, his heart beating painfully against his chest. He looked over his shoulder, seeing the machine was, too, trapped in the wires, farther away from him. It was shrieking and uprooting entire sections of the wires, trying to free itself to kill the ragdolls. 9 pulled one more time on one final effort to free himself, but the barb still cut further into his shoulder. He still had to kill the monster. So exhausted, so far away. He looked up, trying to find the others. He couldn't. They had moved out of his sight. He sighed, relieved. They had escaped. 9 closed his eyes and allowed his head to bow against his chest, chin touching his zipper. His heart still hammered. Rain dripped from his tattered body, the thunder roaring defiantly above, like explosions he barely heard. He couldn't give up. Not now. The weakness threatening to overcome him, but he needed to kill the fabrication machine. Come on, 9. Stay awake. Come on, 9! An angry, loud, and familiar cry. A voice cried. 9's eyes snapped open as he jumped, startled. Stop moving! 7 snapped, her hands working at the wire embedded in his shoulder, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had come back for him. Lift your head, she instructed him, tapping his palm. He obeyed her, silently thanking her as she pulled the wire out from underneath his arm. Finally, after some rather tedious and tense moments, 9 was freed from the barbed wires. Standing on shaking knees, he looked up to 7 and opened his mouth to thank her. However, she grabbed his hand in hers before he had a chance to say anything, and began to pull him through the seemingly endless ocean of wire. They squeezed through every tight space, and 7 helped him into even when he couldn't follow. 9 winced at his injury, keeping steadily sheer jolts of pain through him, sucking away his strength. He hoped that he could somehow manage to kill the machine before he couldn't hold on anymore. Come on, 9, we're almost out, 7 said to him. He gave an indignant shake of his head. He focused his mind on the mission, and his hand tightened on hers. They continued to try to struggle through the fence, the fabrication machine shrieking behind them, hardly having any luck with the wires as well. It was irritated, frustrated. Finally, the bottom of the hill was in sight. The twisted rock outcroppings and the tree trunks dotted the landscape, as the forest soon blended with the misty distance of the barrens. Nine knew that he would be able to get the fabrication machine into those rocks, and his plan would finally be carried out. Grimacing, he continued to walk forward with Seven's help. They struggled into the field, where 5 and 2 seized their hands and pulled them into the dirt. "Are you all right?" 7 asked 9 as he dropped to his knees, panting heavily, nursing his searing injury. He had to struggle for every breath. Every time he inhaled, his chest and ribcage felt like knives, sharp as ice, were being driven into him. He knew he was broken badly. He was extremely weak, barely having enough strength to keep his body upright. 5 held him up, heart lurching as he saw the immense trouble his friend was having just breathing. 9 smiled at him thankfully as they looked up at 7 into her eyes. He knew that he would have to told her that he loved her with every soul as the end drew nearer and his time was nearly up. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay," he replied, looking up at her gratefully. He clutched his side, struggling with the pain that was fighting him at every worse now. The machine planned this. It wanted us to fight the beast so we would be weak and couldn't destroy it. 9 struggled to speak, his voice cutting off into strangled coughs. 7 hushed him soothingly, rubbing his back gently. She was close to him. Drops of rain were dripping off the ends of her skullmet and raining down his back. The male Stitchpunk lifted his eyes, trying his best to see through the water running past his optics. He knew he needed to get on his feet and get the clan out of there. Just as he made a movement to rise, an explosion of pain on his side stole his voice. It even seemed to stop his heart. 9 could only double over, sinking to the ground as his chest heaved with shallow breaths. The corners of his sight darkened as he lay there, paralyzed by the excruciating pain. Seven and 5 said something to him, but their voices were dim and indistinguishable. 9 shook his head, trying to regain his hearing. He suddenly felt a familiar but caring warmth wrap around his shoulder like bands of iron protecting him. "He's too hurt. We have to hide and heal him." He heard these voices as if he was submerged far underwater, and they were above the surface. He closed his eyes and pressed his head to the small chest of the owner of the arms. She only tightened her grip, and he prayed that he regained enough strength to where he could kill the machine and end the war. Each breath he took pained him as he just sat, each second ticking away like a year. He felt the warmth of 7's arm around him, and he wanted to hug her back and tell her that he loved her, and he was very sorry for what he was about to do. The machine suddenly shrieked as it unearthed the last of the barbed wire and tossed it to the side. The Stitchpunks all leapt to their feet and began to run into the maze of dead trees and twisted rocks. 5 and 7 helped the younger male to his feet, and the 3 began to run after the others. 9, however, lingered behind a bit, the light staff clutching tightly in his hands. He looked from the retreating friends to the fabrication machine, knowing exactly what to do. This was his last chance to end it all. End of chapter 25.